Okay, so now we know hopefully quite a lot about Vue.js and also Firebase. This is going to be the final project, and this is the bigger, much bigger than the ones we've created so far, and it's called Muso Ninjas. And what this website allows us to do is log into an account and create different music playlists. So every user can create their own playlists. And on the homepage, we list all of those playlists by different users. And each playlist has a little thumbnail, a title, and who it's by, and how many songs they have inside that playlist. So if I click on this one created by Mario, we can see some playlist details, who it's by, the picture, etc., and also some songs down here on the right. Now notice I'm logged in as Luigi right here, so if I go to one that's created by me, like this one, I can delete the playlist and add new songs. So let me just do test and whatever, test, and add this. It gets added on right here, and I can delete songs as well. So I can only edit my own playlists. If I go to a playlist by someone else, then I can't do any of that. And also I can see only my playlists and create new playlists as well, whereby we can upload images right here. So I'm also going to show you in this project how to use Firebase storage to upload images and store them on Firebase as well. So we're going to put everything together that we've learned so far. Firebase Firestore, authentication, the composition API, bring everything together, but also look at Firebase storage to upload images as well. Alright then, so like always, I just want to give you a bird's eye perspective of the project structure before we start. So this is going to be a component diagram for our project, and we're going to start off with the root component app.vue, the same as normal, with the router embedded inside that. And then for different routes, we show different components. So / would be a home route, and forward login would be a login component, forward sign up would be a sign up component. And then we also have this route /playlists /create. That would be to create a new playlist. And we have also /playlists /ID to see a playlist details, where this route parameter is the ID of that particular playlist. Now, after that, we're going to have /playlists /user, whereby this will list all of your playlists. So if I'm logged in, it will show only my playlist that I've created and nobody else's. Now inside the home.vue, we're going to have a list view component which will cycle through different playlists and output them, and the same will be true inside user playlist. It's just that the list of data is going to be slightly different here, but we're going to use the same component to output that data to make it a bit more reusable. Inside playlist details, we're going to have an add song component, and that was that little form we saw when we go to a playlist that is ours. We can add new songs, so that's going to sit inside the playlist details components. And then at the top we have this navbar component as well. That's going to be present throughout the whole website. So let's start, like always, by creating a new project, and to do that we say Vue create and the project name, which I'm going to call Muso Ninjas. So press enter to create this. We want to manually select features, and we want to use the Vue router, so press space on that and space on this to unselect it, then press enter, and we're going to use Vue 3, and we want to select yes for this for history mode, and then this is going to be in a dedicated config file. We don't want to save this preset, and now it will create that project for us. And once that's done, I'm going to cd into muso-ninjas, and I'm going to open this up in VS Code by saying code, space, full stop, and press enter. Okay then, so this is our new project. So to begin with, I'm just going to do some basic setup and tidy up. So let me open up the source folder and go to the router file first, because I want to remove this about route. We don't need that, but I'm going to keep this home route right here. So let's save that and cross it off. And that means we can delete the about component right here. We can also delete the hello world component. We don't need that. And inside home, I just want to tidy this up a little bit as well. So let me get rid of these two things right here. I'll keep this div with the class of home, and inside it I'll just do a paragraph tag that says homepage. Now down here we don't need to register the hello world component, so let's get rid of that as well. And Now we can save this, and in fact, this import as well we can get rid of. Let's do that, and now we can save this. Okay, so dead simple to begin with. That's our home component. Next, I want to go into app.view just to tidy this up a little bit as well. Now, I'm going to keep in the router view, but I'm going to get rid of this nav at the top. And what I'm going to do is, first of all, get rid of all of this style stuff right here. And I'm going to surround this router view with a div. So let me create this with a class of content, like so. So let me take this router view, cut it and paste it inside here. And the reason I'm doing this is so everything in our web page is essentially now going to be inside this content div, because all of the different route pages will be rendered right here. And so I can style this content now down here to say that the margin will be 0 top and bottom, auto left and right, and then it's going to have a max width of 1200 pixels and a padding of 0 top and bottom, 20 pixels left and right. And what that will do is make the whole website this width essentially and center it on the page because of this auto left and right margin. Okay, so that's pretty much all the basic setup I want to do. So now let me just serve this up by typing npm run serve so we can preview this in a browser. I'm going to click on this and it's appeared on my other screen. Woohoo! Over here, and this is our project so far. So next up, I just want to add some global base styles, and also I want to use a custom font for this project as well. So we'll add that in too. Okay, so to begin with, what I'd like to do is just make a few base core styles which are going to style some common elements on the website. So things like the forms, the buttons, the body itself, maybe create some variables as well for different colors for our website, so that we don't have to keep continuously doing them as we progress through it. So to do this, I'm going to create inside the assets folder a new file, and I'm going to call that main.css. And by the way, we can delete this logo right here. We don't need that. That's just a Vue logo. Okay, so the first thing I want to do inside this file is to create a reference to a custom font. So I'm going to grab that from Google Fonts over here, which you can find at fonts.google.com, and I'm going to use one called Nonito. So just search for that, click on Nonito, and then we can select the different font weights and styles that we want. So I'll select this one, 200, also 300, 400, we'll go with 600, and then 700, 800, and 900. Okay, so I don't want the italics, I don't need those. And then we're going to use an import, so click on this. And this right here, this input statement inside the style tags, we need to copy that. And then all we need to do is paste it at the top over here. But before we do that, let me do a comment to say custom fonts. And then below that, we'll paste it in. Okay, so now we've imported this font and we can use it inside our project. Now, the next thing I want to do is just create a few CSS variables. So again, let me do a comment and say variables. And by the way, if you don't know what CSS variables are, they're just basically values that are declared on the root selector. And I'll show you how to do that in a second, which we can then reuse in our different selectors later on. So if we use a hex code quite a lot, we don't have to keep repeating that hex code over and over again. We just choose the variable name which holds that value. If you want to learn more about them, I've got a whole series on CSS variables on my YouTube channel. Feel free to check it out. Okay, so down here, the way we select the root element is by saying colon and then root. And this grabs us basically the very root element inside the HTML document, and therefore it will apply to everything inside that root element. And all we do to create variables is give our variables a name by saying double dash and then the name of the variable. So I could create one called primary, for example, and I would set it equal to a value. Now, in our case, it's going to be a hex code, which I'm going to paste in, and it's kind of like a grey colour, a bluey grey. So that's our primary. I'm going to do the same thing for two more. So I'm going to paste these in, and we have secondary, which is a very light grey, and we have a warning colour, which is a pinky red. Okay? All right, so now let's do a few base styles. Now, what I'm going to do is copy and paste these in just a little bit at a time so I can walk you through each section. So the base styles are right here. First of all, we have an asterisk, and that means select absolutely everything on the screen and apply these rules to every element. So we're stripping away the margin and padding from every single element. Then we give everything a font family of Nonito, which is this thing right here that we imported. And the color of that font is going to be the primary color. So this is how we use a variable. We've declared the variable. We use it by saying var, then in parentheses, whichever variable we want to use, which is primary in this case. So now the color of the text is going to be this color right here. Alright, so the body, we give a background of a very light grey, and then all anchor tags we say text decoration none, meaning we remove the underline. Okay, so next up we have buttons. So we say every button and every element with a class of button, because sometimes we don't use a button tag. It could be an anchor tag with a class of button or BTN. We say background is this variable, which is a very light grey. And then the border radius, 8 pixels to soften the corners. No border, some padding, a font weight of 600, which is a bit bolder. The cursor is pointer, and we display as inline block. Now when we hover over buttons, we say make the background that darker colour right here, primary, and the colour of the text is white. If a button is disabled, then the opacity should be 0.5, so it's faded out a bit. The colour is this primary right here, so that's the colour of the text. The background is the secondary, which is the lighter colour, and cursor is not allowed, and not allowed is a little red circle with a strike through it. So that's the button styles. Next up is the forms, because we will have a few forms. So right here we style every form like this, max width of 400 pixels. We strip out the margin top and bottom, auto left and right to centralize it on the page. We give it a bit of padding, border radius of 8 pixels. We give each form a box shadow, and what this does is give it a bit of depth on the page, and a very small border, very thin border of 1 pixel, and it's the secondary colour, so that's the light grey right here. So a very subtle border. The background of every form is white. Then input and text areas, strip away the border. Border bottom though is 1 pixel solid and the light grey colour. Padding is 10 pixels. No outline. We display block, width 100%, so 100% of the form itself, its parent element. Box sizing is border box, and then margin is 20 pixels top and bottom, auto left and right. Now there's one more little thing, and that is just anything with a class of error. So if we output an error on the screen at any point, we'll use this class and we'll colour that text the red colour. That's this variable right here. The font size is 14 pixels. The margin top and bottom 16 pixels, 0 left and right. Phew, so that is all of the basic styles. Now if I save this, we still need to use this, and we need to import these styles into our main.js file right here in order for them to take effect. So I'm going to say global styles right here, and then underneath that I'm just going to import, and we want to go // into assets and then / main.css. Like so. So now we've imported them, they will be used on the website. Now if I save this at the minute and preview over here, we don't see much difference because we only have this bit of text right here, but you can see it's the new font and the margin has been stripped away. So hopefully now as we make our project in the future, it's going to look a little nicer as we make it, and we don't have to spend so much time on CSS. Now if you do just want to copy and paste this from my repo, you can do. You just need to go to the repo, and remember the link is attached to one of the first lessons in this whole course where I talk about the course files, and you need to select lesson 134 right here, then go to main.css. And in fact what I'll do is leave this link attached to this lecture in case you just want to go in, copy all of this and paste it inside your file. Okay, so for this project, I'm going to create a brand new Firebase backend because I don't want to have to contend with all of the data and users that we currently have on the project that we created right here. So we're going to create a brand new project for this. So let's give this a name. I'm going to call it Muso Ninjas, and then I'm going to click on continue. And then we don't need analytics, then create the project, and this will just take about 20 seconds or so. And then when it's done, click on continue. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to Cloud Firestore and I'm going to enable our Firestore database. So create database, and we're going to start in test mode so that we can easily access our data to begin with. Then click on next, then we click on enable, and it will create the Firestore for us. Okay, cool. So now we need to enable authentication. So click on that and then get started. And now we're going to enable email and password. So let's do that at the top and click on save. And then finally, we're going to be using storage as well in this project to upload images. So if you click on this, you can see this is where we would upload files right here. Now we don't need to do anything to initialize this to begin with, so we'll come back to storage later on. So now we've done all that, next up we can initialize our Firebase project on the front end. So in the last project we created, which was the chat room, we did this process near the end when we wanted to deploy to Firebase. But now we want to do this from the start, and I would recommend doing this. If you know you're going to use Firebase services, then I would recommend initializing your Firebase app from the start when you create a new project, because then you have all of your different rules files, your settings, all on the front end, and when you want to deploy them, you can do that. You don't need to do anything at the end or worry about setting it up at the end. So let's open up a terminal and create a new one. And I'm going to say Firebase init. And remember, this only works if you've installed the Firebase Tools package, which we did in the last project. So this is going to initialize a front-end project for us. So yes, we're ready. And now we're going to select every feature that we will be using. So press space on Firestore, we need that. Also on hosting, and also on storage this time, because we will be using that to upload images. So press enter, and we're going to use an existing project. We need to select Muso Ninjas, which is this one right here I've just created. And now it's going to go ahead and create this project. But first of all, it's asking us what file should be used for Firestore rules. This default one is fine, so press enter. And then now for Firestore indexes, again, default is fine, so press enter. And what do you want to use as the public directory? Now remember, Vue builds into a dist folder, and we want that to be the public directory. So call this dist and press enter. And we do, yes, want to configure this as a single page app. So press yes and then press enter. No, we don't want to do this. And then what file should be used for storage rules this time? And again, the default is fine, storage.rules. Press enter, and now that's created. It's initialized. So now notice we have these Firestore files right here, one for the rules, which we've already seen, and one for indexes. We might touch on that later on. We also have the firebase.json file, which is settings for our project. And now we can see the storage.rules as well, which is very much like Firestore rules, but this time it's for storage. So we'll see those later on. And then finally, we have the dist folder right here, which is what is ultimately going to be deployed to Firebase. But when we build our Vue application, it will replace whatever is inside here before we deploy it. Okay, so that is our Firebase project set up on the back end and also initialized on the front end as well. So next up, we'll make a config file to connect to the back end. Alright, so now what I'd like to do is create a config file to connect to our Firebase backend over here, much like we have done in the previous project. So inside source, let's create a new folder called Firebase, and then inside that we'll create a new file called config.js. Now we do need to install the Firebase package again, because remember, we install that locally to every project that we create that uses Firebase. It's not Firebase tools, it's the Firebase SDK to communicate with the backend, remember. So let's do that. npm install Firebase, like so, and press enter. And while that installs, let's go and get our config. So go to Project Overview and then click on this icon right here to add a new web app. And we're going to call this Muso Ninjas. And then we're also going to set up Firebase hosting, register the app. And then I'm going to click on next. click on next again, and then finally continue to console. Then if we open up this and click on the cog to go to the settings, I want to scroll down here and I want to get the config object. So copy this by clicking on that, and then inside the config file we can paste inside this Firebase config object. Alright, so now we can import the different features that we need. So let's start off at the top with the Firebase core package. So import Firebase from, and it's Firebase /app, and then we're also going to use Firestore, so import Firebase /Firestore, and then after that we're also going to use the authentication service, so import, and it's Firebase /auth. Now we are as well going to use storage, but we'll come to that later when we start with storage. For now, let's leave it at this. Okay, so now we have to initialize the Firebase app, so connect to the backend. So to do that, we say firebase.initialize app, and then we pass in the config, which is this thing right here. So copy that and paste it in. And I'll just do comments above this. So init Firebase first of all, and then after that, we're going to initialize the different services that we need. So init services, and the first one will be project Firestore. So const project Firestore is equal to Firebase.Firestore and invoke that. And then the next one is authentication. So const project auth is equal to Firebase.auth and invoke that. So now to communicate with the Firestore, we use that in the future, and to use the authentication service, we use this. We need to export both of those things, but before we do that, let's also generate the timestamp, because we will use that later on. So const timestamp is equal to Firebase.Firestore.field value.server timestamp. So remember, this is a function which we invoke to create a timestamp value that can be saved in Firestore. Alright, so now let's export what we need at the bottom. So export an object, and inside the object we need project Firestore. We also need project auth, and then finally we need the timestamp. Okay, so that is pretty much it. Now we've set up Firebase and we can use these different services in our project. So we're going to be using Firebase Auth and Firestore in this project, so it makes sense that we have Firebase composables much like the ones we created in the last project. Now in that we had composables for signing up, logging in, logging out, we had one for getting the current user, and we also had composables for getting a collection and setting up a real-time listener to that collection, and also using a collection. Now the good thing about those composables is that they were just regular functions. Their logic wasn't embedded into Vue components and split up into different parts of those components. It was all kept together in a single function and file, which was completely separate from any Vue component, and then we just imported them into any Vue component that needed them. So these composables were not dependent on any components, and they're very reusable. Therefore, we could just use the same ones for our project here. There's no need to rewrite them from scratch because they will be the same. We might tweak them a little bit, but generally their functionality is the same. So we'll just be reusing the ones we created earlier, so we don't have to type everything out from scratch. Now, if you haven't seen the lessons where we made these from scratch, they are lesson 106, 108, 111, 112, 117 and 118. So definitely check out those lessons, first of all, if you want a detailed approach as to how these composable functions were made. So what I'm going to do is leave a zip folder with these composable files inside it attached to this lesson. So you can either just unzip that folder, then drag and drop all the composable functions inside our project right here, or you can copy and paste them in. But it's all code we've written before. Nothing is new about them. So first of all, I'm going to go inside the source folder and create a new folder for these composables called composables. And then I already have these in a folder, and I'm just going to drag them all in. So likewise, you can do the same thing with the folder I attach to this lecture. So these are all the composables we created for the last project, and we've already seen all of the code before, but I will quickly walk you through them just to refresh your memory. So first of all, we have this one, gets collection, and this is what we use to set up a real-time listener to a certain collection. Now, we pass that collection right here as an argument when we use this in a component, and that means that we can reuse this in different components for different collections. Now, inside here, we create two refs, one for the documents when we retrieve them, and one for an error if there is one. Now, the first thing we do is create a collection reference right here by saying project firestore.collection, and we pass in the collection that we have right here. And by the way, we imported project firestore and these two things at the top of the file. Now, we order this reference by the created app property, because in the future, any documents that we create, we're going to apply this created app property to. Now, down here, we set up our real-time listener using the onSnapshot method, and we take in the snap when we receive one. Now, what we're doing is creating a local array called results, and for each document inside the snapshot, we're adding that document to the results right here. And each document, we extract the data and apply that to the document object, and also the ID. Now, right here, remember, we're checking that we have a valid created app property, because that needs to be created on the server first of all. So if this wasn't here, then we'd have problems when we try to use the created app property in our project later on. Okay, so down here, all we're doing is updating the values of our refs after we've created this. So documents right here, we're applying the value of results to that. And then the error is obviously null if we have this data. Now, if there is an error, we have a second callback function inside this onSnapshot method for that. We log the error to the console, we set the value of documents to be null, and we create an error for the error ref as well. Could not fetch the data. Now, down here we have watch effect, and inside that we take in automatically the onInvalidate function. And remember, this function fires this thing right here whenever the component that uses this is unmounted from the DOM. So say we're on a page that uses this to list out the data. If we then go to another page which doesn't need the data, this function will then run, which unsubs from the real-time listener. And remember, that function is returned to us right here. So we invoke that to unsubscribe, and therefore we're not stacking up all of our real-time listeners. We're only adding them when we need them and removing them when we no longer need them. Finally, we just return the error and the documents at the bottom. Okay, so next we have use sign up down here. And again, we import these things at the top. We create an error outside of the use sign up function right here, because remember, this thing has a global state, if you like. There's only ever you logged in when you're on your computer. And so if there's an error with your sign up, then it's very specific to your experience on the web page. There doesn't need to be separate errors for different components. We only need one, and that can be shared if there's a problem. Unlike collections, where we might have two different collections showing at the same time, so we need two errors. Okay, so we have that error right here, which we initialize to null. The sign up function is asynchronous, and it takes in an email, password, and display name. So when we call this function, we pass those things in. To begin with, we set the value of the error to be null. Then we try to sign them up using this method from Firebase. So on project auth, create user with email and password, and we pass those two things in. This is asynchronous. We wait for it using await, and we store the response right here. Now, if there's no response, it means there's some kind of error, so we check for that, and we throw a custom error with this message: could not complete sign up. Now, if there is a response, then we just go straight down to here, and we then update the profile, because we also have the display name which we need to associate with that user as well. So we do that using update profile right here on the response user object that we get back. Now, after that, we set the error value to null because everything's worked, and we return that response in case we need it in the future when we call this function. Now, if there is an error, we catch it, much like this one here. We throw it here, and we could catch it here. We log that error to the console, and also we update the error value, which is this thing. Finally, we create the use sign up function, which is the thing that's exported at the bottom, and we return these values. Okay, so that's use sign up. Use logout, very simple. All we do is, again, create a global error for this. We have a logout function, which is asynchronous, and initialize the value to be null to begin with. We try to sign them out using this method, sign out on project auth. If there's an error, we log that and update the error value. At the end, we have the use logout function, which returns the logout function and the error value as well, and we export that at the bottom. So dead simple again. Then we have use login, which is pretty similar, a global error. The login function, asynchronous, takes in the email password, set the error value to null to begin with. We try to sign in using signing with email and password like this. We await that and store the response. If it works, we set the error value to null and we return the response again, just in case we need it wherever we use this function in the future. If there's an error, we catch it and we update the error value with this message, incorrect login credentials. Then we create the use login function, which returns those two values, the login function and the error value, and we export that. All right, we're getting there. So we have use collection. So this is not to get documents, this is to do something with the collection. In our case, we have inside that a function called add doc right here. So first of all, we set the error to null. Then inside this function, which is asynchronous, we take the document we want to add, and that is going to be a JavaScript object which represents that document. To begin with, we set the value of the error to be null because we're trying this process. Then we go into a collection, which is the collection we pass in to this composable, and we try to add the document that we pass in right here. If there's an error, then we log that and we update the error value with could not send the message. We're going to change this later on probably because that was from the chat room, but for now let's just leave that. And then down here we return those values, error, which is in here, and add doc, which is right here. And these are now inside the use collection function, because remember, we might use multiple collections, so it makes no sense to have a global error for this because we could be doing two different things at once. Okay, so we return that at the bottom. And the final one, pretty simple, is just to get the current user, and this thing right here sets the initial value to be project.auth.current_user. That gets the current user, but remember, to begin with, it might be null. So down here, we listen for auth state changes to update this if they log in or log out. We log this to the console every time there is a change and the user that currently is. So if they logged in, that will be the user itself. If they logged out, it will be null. And we update this ref to be that user. So again, null if they logged out, and the user object if they just logged in. And finally, we have the get user composable function itself, where we return the user value, and we export this at the bottom. Phew, so that was a lot to go through, but hopefully it all kind of makes sense because we have just done this in the previous project. And again, if you've not watched those videos, definitely check those out first, because I go into much more detail and explain the logic behind creating these a lot more. But now we have those, that saved us a lot of work in this project, and we can just use them when we need them in our components. And like I said, we probably will dive into these and edit them at some point as well to update what we need for our project. But they are pretty reusable and pretty general in their function already. Okay, so the first real thing I'd like to do is to create a login view, and that will be to show a web form whereby a user can log into the application. So I'm going to create this inside the views folder, but before I create it, I will create a new folder inside that called auth, and then all of my authentication views are going to live in here. So that will be the login view and also the sign up view. Now you don't need to do this if you don't want to, you can place it directly inside views, but this is just the way I like to work to keep my files and views a bit more organized. So inside that, I'm going to create a new file called login.view, and then here I'm just going to boilerplate this by typing view and then enter, and for the template I will just do a paragraph tag saying login. So I'm going to save that and first of all set up a route for this file. So let's do that inside our routes array. We'll create a new object. The path is going to be to /login. The name is going to be login, and then the component is going to be login. Now we need to import that, so I'm going to duplicate this one at the top, and this time we need to go into the auth folder after views. So /auth/ and then it's login. So let's double click that and that one and say login. Okay, so now if we were to go to /login like so, we should see login right here. So next we need to work on this template. So first of all, I'm going to get rid of this login paragraph and instead replace it with a form. Now we don't need the form action, so let's get rid of that. And inside we need two input fields, one for the email and one for the password. That's what they're going to use to log in. So let's do the first input field, which is of type email. And we also need a placeholder for this, which is going to say email. And then also a v-model directive so we can track what the user is typing, and that is going to be email. So we'll make that data property in a minute when we come to the setup function down here. For now, let's do another input field, and this is going to be for the password. So type password. The placeholder is going to be password as well. And then finally another v-model, this time password. Okay, so we have the two input fields. We also need a button, and that is just going to say log in like so. Okay, so at the top of the form, I'd like an H3, just to say that this is the login form. I'm going to save that now and preview, and that looks pretty good. And the reason it looks quite nice is because, remember, we created all of those base styles inside main.css earlier in the chapter. So these were the styles for the form and the button. They're all being applied to our form right here, which is why it looks quite nice. All right then. So next up is to work on our component object. So let's create the setup function first of all. And what do we want to do in here? Well, we want to use this composable use login because we need this login function to log the user in. So in order to do that, we have to import it at the top. So let me say import, and we need use login from. Now, look where we are. We're inside the auth folder. So we'd have to come up out of the auth folder, then out of the views folder, and then into composables. Now, when you have paths that look a little like this, it becomes a bit unreadable. So what I like to do sometimes is instead use this format, @ and then / whatever folder we need to go into, for example, composables. And what this means right here is start at the source folder. So start here and then go into composables. So this represents the root of the project relative to the source folder. And it's sometimes a bit easier than coming out of folders using .. over and over again. So sometimes I will use this if we have to jump up out of multiple folders. So / composables to go into that folder. Then we need use login. So composables use login. Yeah, that's right. Now we can use that down here. So I'm going to say const, and remember, inside this use login composable, we return two values, error and login. I want to get both of those. So const error and login, that is equal to use login like so. So we can use those now down here. We also need to create two refs, one for this and one for this. Let's do that. Const email is equal to ref. Press enter and that auto imports it. The initial value of this one is going to be just an empty string. Same for the password. So password is equal to ref, and that's an empty string. Okay, so after that, we also need to return these values so that they can be used up here in the template. So let's do that at the bottom, return, and it's email and password. Cool. So if I save it, all of this should still work. There's no errors. Awesome. Now the next thing I want to do is handle the submission of this form. So let's add an event listener to this. So at submit, we want to prevent the default action. So .prevent, that's equal to a function which we're going to call handle submit. And then we need to create that down here inside the setup function. So const handle submit is equal to an async function because we're going to use the login function inside here, and that is asynchronous. So inside this function we can now call the login method. So we can say const response is equal to await, and it's the login function. And remember, this expects an email and a password. If we take a look at use login, email and password, and this is the thing we return, by the way, so that will be stored inside the response here just in case we need it later on. And inside login we pass in the email.value, so email.value, that's this thing right here, this ref, and also the password value like so. Okay, so if this works, it means there will be no error, right? So what we can do is check for that error. If there's no error, I'm going to log something to the console. So I'll say if, and then not error.value. So if there's no error, then we'll say console.log user logged in like so. So this thing right here, remember, if we go to use login, is updated right here if they've entered incorrect login credentials. So if there is an error, then this won't be output. If there's not an error, it will. Now, if there is an error, I want to maybe output it in the template. So first of all, down here, let us return handle submit, because we need that in the template right here. And also let us return the error. So error like so. Now just above the button, I want to do a div with a class of error, so div.error, and then inside here we're going to output the error, and we'll attach a v-if to this, set that equal to error. So if there is an error, it's going to output that right here in the form. Okay, so that's if they get their login credentials incorrect. So then, now I'm going to save this and preview over here. Now, if we try to do this at the minute, then it's not going to work, and that's because we don't actually have any users in our project yet. Okay, so if I tried this, for example, mario@google.com and then test1234, I'm going to try to log in and it says incorrect login credentials because obviously no user exists just yet. So let's add a user right here, which we can do from the backend. So I'm going to say the email is mario@google.com. and then the password is test1234. I'm going to add that user, and now if we try to log in, hopefully this should go away, and we see user logged in right down here. So now this works. Okay, so whenever we make a request to Firebase, for example, logging in, when we click on this, that request to go to Firebase and come back takes a fraction of time. And what I'd like to do is show the user some kind of pending state or loading message when that is going on in the background. So when they click on this, I'd like to replace this login text with something like loading or pending instead, just so they know something is going on in the background. So to start with, I'm going to use the use login composable right here, and I'm going to create a new ref at the top, and I'm going to call that is pending. And this is basically going to be a Boolean, and it's going to be true if a request is going on. For example, if we start to try and sign them in, and it's going to be false if it's not going on. So before we try to make the request or after it's finished. So let me set that to be false to begin with, because we're not making any request by default. And then what I'd like to do inside here when we call the login function is set that value to true, because we're starting to make a request. So I'm going to say is pending dot value and set that equal to true. Now then, at this point where we have a response, we want to set it to be false again because it's now complete. So just before we return, I'm going to say is pending dot value is equal to false again, because now we've completed the action we wanted to do. And the same down here, even though we have an error, it's now no longer pending. So I'm going to say down here at the bottom is pending dot value is also equal to false. And then we also need to return this value right here at the bottom. So is pending like so. And now we could use this value inside our login component. So let's go and do that. Let's right here extract is pending. And then down here, I'm going to return it as well, so that we can use it inside our template. Now, what do I want to do with this? Well, I want to show two different buttons. I want to show this one right here, if is pending is false, meaning there's not currently a request going on. And if it's true, it means we've already clicked this and a request is going on in the background. And in that case, I want to show something else, a different button that says loading. And also, maybe that button should be disabled as well. So this button right here, I'm going to attach v-if to, and I'm going to set that equal to not is pending. Okay, so only if this value right here is false, in which case the whole statement is true, then will this show. Now, if I save it now, it will show by default because is pending is false to begin with. Now, if I click it, is pending will go to true, and then it should hide this component. And it does, but only momentarily. Let me refresh that and click it again. And again, it was so quick that it was hard to even say. But let me now try instead adding the other button. So I'm going to duplicate this, and this time this is only showing if is pending is true. So if we have a request going on in the background, this is going to say instead loading, and also we'll make the button disabled so we can't actually press it. So disabled like so. Now if we come over here, I'm going to enter in some details. So mario@google.com and then test 1 2 3 4. I'm going to log in and notice it change. It will be very quick, but notice it change. Loading, you saw that, and then it goes back to login. So again, loading and then login. So that's quite nice. Now a user knows that something is going on in the background when a request is being made. Now what I'd like to do is add this is pending property to other composables as well, because other composables are going to be making requests, and it might be useful in the future to show something when those requests are being made. So I'm going to copy this thing right here, and I'm going to open up some other composables. We'll start with use collection. So right here we're trying to do some kind of asynchronous task, right? So we need an is pending value, and then when we call this function, we'll say is pending dot value is equal to false to begin with, or rather, sorry, true, because we're just starting the asynchronous task. So we set it equal to true, and then once it's done, we set it back to false. So is pending dot value is then equal to false, and the same is true down here. Is pending dot value is equal to false again, and at the bottom we need to return this is pending like so. Okay, so that's this file done. Let's also do this inside use logout. So again, I'm going to paste in this ref at the top, false to begin with. Then down here, when we start the logout, is pending dot value becomes true, and then I'm going to copy this and paste it down here and set it now equal to false again once it's done, and also at the bottom down here set that to false, and then finally we need to return it is pending like so. And there's one more, and that's going to be use sign up right here. So we need that ref. Let me copy this again and paste it in here, and then inside the sign up function to begin with, we want to take is pending dot value and set it equal to true to begin with once we start to make the request. I'm going to copy this, and then down here, once we've done this, I want to set it back equal to false because it's no longer loading. And also down here, if we have an error, set it equal to false, and then finally again return is pending. Now we don't need it in get user because we don't really have a loading state. This just happens all in the background to get the user and detect when it changes. And the other one was get collection. We don't need it here because this is a real-time listener. So again, we're constantly listening in the background. We're not making a request and then clicking a button to make another or anything like that. So we don't need one here at the moment either. But now we have this pending state in all of the other composables, all for authentication and for, as well, use collection to add new documents. So whenever any of that stuff goes on, we can show some kind of loading message to the user. Okay, so we have our login view right now. I also want to create one for signing up. So let's create that file inside the auth folder, and we'll call this signup.view. So inside here, let's boilerplate this component first. Now the template is going to be very similar to the template for the login. So I'm going to copy all of this form and paste it in here so we don't have to write out the whole thing from scratch. I'm going to change the H3 from login to sign up, and then we're going to keep these two input fields, one for email, one for password. We also want one though for the display name. So let's do an input field. The type is text. The placeholder this time is going to be display name, like so. And also we need a v model, so v-model, and set that equal to display name. Okay then, so we want to change this from login to sign up, like so. And if it's currently loading, if it's pending, we're still going to show this button right here, loading, okay? So that's pretty much now the template done. We need to create these three properties and also this function. So again, I'm going to go back to login, and I'm going to copy a couple of things. These two refs for a start, And inside our setup function, I'm going to create those refs. So we have one for email, one for password. I'm also going to create one for the display name and set that to be an empty string to begin with as well. Okay, so now we need to return those values at the bottom. So let's return them. Email, password, and display name. So now we're hooking those up. We also need to import this use signup composable right here, because when we submit this inside this handle submit function, we're going to eventually call this use signup hook or composable. So let me import it. I'm going to say import, and then again I'm going to use the @ symbol, and we need to say import use signup first from, and then @ symbol to say start at source, then go into composables, and then we want / use signup. Okay, so now we can use it down here in the setup function. I'm going to use it, and I want to grab a few things from this. We want the error if there is one. We want the signup function, and also is pending, because we use that right here to show when something's loading. So let me just return is pending now so I don't forget later. And then we set that equal to use signup like so. Okay, so we have these things. Now we need to create this handle submit function so we can call this signup function when they submit the form. So let's do that. Const handle submit and set that equal to an async function because we're using an asynchronous method inside it. And inside that, I'm going to say const response is equal to await, and then we want to use the signup function right here. Now that takes in 3 arguments, remember. It takes in the email first, then the password, then the display name. So let's pass all of those things in. So email.value, and then we want the password.value, and then finally the display name dot value. Okay, so this response right here is being returned, inside use signup right here, just in case we need it in the future. We don't at the minute, but in the future we might do. Now, if this is successful, this thing right here, then we still won't get an error. It will still be null. But if it's not successful, then it will be some kind of value. So what I'm going to do is check, is the error value empty? Because in that case, we've successfully signed up, and for now all I'm going to do is log that to the console. So I'll say if and then not error.value. So this means if we don't have an error, if everything was okay, then I'm going to log to the console. So console.log, and we'll just say user signed up. Okay, if we do have an error, we want to output it in the template right here, which we do at the minute, but we also need to return it at the bottom, and we need to return handle submit. All right, so I think that is everything. Now, before I try signing up, I'm just going to come over here and I'm going to delete this user, because when we signed up over here from the back end, we didn't add a display name for that person, and we want every user to have a display name. So let me delete that account first of all. And now that's deleted, we can go over here and we can go to /signup. This at the minute is not going to work because we've not created a route for it. So we need to do that inside the router file. So I'm going to do another object inside here. The path is going to be to /signup. The name of this is going to be signup. And then the component is going to be surprise, surprise, signup, which we need to import, and we'll change login right here to signup like so. Okay, so all this is done. Now if we go to /signup, it should work, but it's not doing. So let's see what's going on. Do we have everything named correctly? Component signup, we're importing it right here, signup. Yep, everything's there. I'm going to go to the signup component just to see everything's working. We don't have a ref import, so that's why it won't be working. So let's import that. Import ref from Vue and save it. Okay, so now if we refresh, now we see the sign up form. So I'm just going to open up the console over here, and I'm going to try logging in, or rather signing up. So Mario is the display name. The email is Mario at google.com and then test 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to sign up. We should see the loading button momentarily. Yep. And then when it's done, user signed up. Awesome. And we should be able to see that user over here if we now refresh, which we can do. Now, if I try to sign up using the same credentials again, I should get an error, which should be output right here. And we can see the email address is already in use by another account. So that's right here, this error. And the error comes from this thing right here where we catch the error when we try to create a new user. So the error is being updated right here and passed back to our component. So that's the login and the sign up process complete. Next, I want to create a navbar component that's going to sit at the top of the website. So now what I'd like to do is create a navbar which sits at the top of the website for every single page. And inside that navbar, we're going to have a little logo or image on the left, then the title of the website, which is also going to be a link to the homepage. And then on the right over here, we're going to have some different links or buttons, and that will be to sign up, log in or log out, etc. So first of all, let's create this component inside the components folder, and we'll call this navbar.view. I'm going to cross off a couple of things that we don't need anymore over here, like so. Okay, so let's boilerplate this first of all. And inside the template, I'm going to start with a class of navbar on a div. So this is going to surround our entire navbar. And inside that, we're going to have a nav. Now then, like I said, there's three things in here. There's going to be an image on the left. Then there's going to be the title. Then over on the right, there's going to be some links. Now, I'm going to leave off the image to begin with, and we'll add that in at the end. So for now, let's just do the title, which is going to be an H1. And inside that H1, I want a router link, because if you click on this, I want to go to the home page. So now let's do a router link tag, like so, and we'll close that off, router link. And we need to say where it's going. So we're going to bind, so colon, to, and then it's equal to something. This is going to be an object where we specify the name of the component, and that is going to be home. So clicking on this is going to take you home. And the title is Muso Ninjas. All right. So what I'm going to do before I go on is just nest this inside the app.view file over here. So I need to import it inside a script tag. Let's create that first of all, like so. And inside that script tag, we need our object, which we export. But before we make the object, let's import the navbar component. So import navbar, and it's going to be from, and we want // into the components folder /navbar.view. Okay, so we have that import. Now we can create the object. So export default, the object, where we specify the components we'll be using, and one of those is the navbar. Now we can nest it, and I'll do that above this div. So navbar like so, and so obviously it's not going to be just 1200 pixels in width. It will span the whole page because it's outside of this content. Okay, so if I save that and preview, we can now see this navbar at the top. So next I want to do the links on the right, which is login, sign up and log out. So inside the navbar component, let's come after the H1 and we'll do a div for these links with a class of links. So inside here, there's going to be, first of all, a button to log out. So log out. Now this is not a router link because it's not going to link to another component. All we're going to do if a user clicks on this eventually is make a request to Firebase to log the user out. That's all. Now under that, we need two links. We need one link to the sign up page and one link to the login page. So let's do a router link for each one. Router-link like so, and close those off. And what I'd like to do is give each one a class of BTN, because remember, we style that right here to be the same as a button, and I want them to look like buttons, these links. So I give each one a class of BTN, and I'm going to duplicate this so we've got two of them. Now for the first one, we want to bind to the to attribute, and that is going to be, so we can go to the sign up component. So name is going to be sign up, and that's going to look for the sign up component. We also need to say sign up right here, and then this one will say to, and that is going to be to the login component. So again, name, this time login, like so. And then over here, we need to say log in. All right then. So if I save this now and preview, we should see that new component, but we don't. Is something wrong here? And I've just noticed the name right here needs to be a capital S. Save that. And hopefully now if we refresh, now we can see these buttons right here. So this one goes to sign up, this to log in, and this eventually will log the user out, okay? So that's pretty much this component done. We still need to add in the image, but we'll do that shortly. Before we do that, I'm just going to add in a few styles. So I'm going to copy in a couple at a time, but before I do that, I'm going to set these to be scoped so they don't apply anywhere else in the project. So first of all, this navbar class right here, which is this, we say that has some padding, a margin bottom of 60 pixels, so the content right here comes away from it a little bit, and then the background is white. Now the nav inside that, which is this, we display as flex, and when we do that, it means that every item, so the h1 and the div and later the image that's inside it, they will display horizontally on the same row next to each other. So instead of on top of each other, they'll go next to each other. Now we also say align items to the center, and that means that vertically all of them will align to the center as well. And then max width right here, 1200 pixels, so the same as the content, and then margin 0 and auto to centralize it. So if I save this now, we can see now it looks a bit like this, which is starting to look better. Okay, so let me just paste in a couple more rules down here. So we have the H1, which we give a margin left of 20 pixels, the links, and we say margin left auto. And what that does is it takes this thing right here, and because the parent is display flex and we apply a margin left of auto, it makes all of these links go all the way over to the right. That's a nice little CSS trick. If you want to align one thing inside the flex all the way to the right, you can use margin left auto to do that. Okay, and then the anchor tags inside the links and the button, we give a margin left and a font size of 14 pixels. So if we take a look now, that looks a lot better. All right, cool. So that's looking all right, but we still need to add on the image over on the left. So I already have this image right here called Ninja in a folder. I'm just going to drag that into the assets folder. Now it looks like this, quite a nice little logo, and I got this from Adobe stock. So if you want to use it in one of your projects, then you do need to buy a license for it. You can also find this on my GitHub repo on the correct lesson. So if you go to the course files, this repo right here, choose lesson 141 from the drop down, then go into the source folder and then into assets, and you can see ninja.png right here. So you can right click that and save it, or download it right here if you want to use it. But again, if you use this in one of your projects that you're going to deploy, make sure that you buy the license from Adobe stock images. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, now we have that image, is use it inside our navbar component. So just before the H1 over here, that's where we're going to place the image. I'm going to do an image tag, and this image source is going to be at, which means start at the base or the root directory over here. So at source, and then / assets, and then / ninja.png. And then the alt tag we don't really need. Probably you should add one, but for the sake of this tutorial, we'll leave it off. Okay, so if I save that now and take a look, there it is, but it's absolutely huge. So what I'm going to do is just add in one more style down here. Let me paste this in, and we're giving this now a max height of 60 pixels. And if we take a look now, that looks a lot better. So that is, my friends, our navbar component done. Alright then, so time for another challenge, and in this one what I'd like you to do is log the user out. So you can see right here we have a logout button. I want it so that if a user clicks on that, we make a request to Firebase to log the user out. So what I'd like you to do is fire a function called handle submit when the logout button is clicked, this thing right here. Now inside that function, log the user out and then redirect them to the login view. So that would be / login. Now, in order to do this, you can use a composable, use logout, and also you'll need the Vue router. So remember, to get that, we use the use router function from Vue router. So pause this right here, have a good go at it, and then if you want to see my solution, just click play again now. Okay then, so the first thing I'm going to do is import the use logout composable, this thing right here. So import use logout from, and we want @/composables, and then we want use logout. Okay, so now we can use that down here inside the setup function. So we want to grab the logout function from this. So I'll say logout like so and set it equal to use logout. Alright, so now we have access to that logout function. The next thing I want to do is create a function called handle click or handle submit. This probably should have been handle click, my apologies. So we'll call it that. So const handle click is equal to an async function, because this logout function right here is asynchronous. And inside this function, we just want to await logout like so. Now, we need to return this at the bottom so we can attach it to this button. So let's return down here, handle click, and then let's attach a click event to this button. So @click is equal to handle click like so. Now, I also said after a user is logged out, I want to redirect them. Now, to do that, we need to import the use router function. So let's do that. Import use router, and that is going to be from Vue-router. We've seen how to do all of this before. And then down here, we need to get an instance of the router object. And to do that, we say const router. You can call that constant what you want, but you set it equal to use router and invoke that function. That returns to us the router object, and we can use that to redirect the user. So first of all, I'm going to say console.log user logged out, and then after that I'm going to say router.push, and we're going to push them to the login route. So we'll say the name is login like so. And that's pretty much all there is to it. So now we click on this button, it tries to log them out, logs this to the console, and then we redirect them to the login view. Alright, so let's give this a whirl. I'm going to save it right here, and first of all I'm going to make sure I'm logged in. So I'm going to say Mario and it's going to be google.com and then test 1 2 3 4. I'm going to log in. I'm going to open up the console just to make sure that I'm logged in. Yep, user logged in. Then I'll go to a different page, sign up, so we can see that redirect at the end. Then I'm going to click on log out, and it says user logged out, and we're redirected to the login screen. So this is all working. Now we can log in, we can sign up, and we can log out. Now next, I want to conditionally show these links dependent on our authentication status. Alright, so another challenge for you. This time what I'd like you to do is conditionally show these buttons. So we don't show them all at once, but conditionally show them dependent on the user's authentication status. So only show the logout button if we are logged in, because if we're logged in, we don't need to see sign up, we don't need to see login. Only show this one if we're logged in, and only show the sign up and login links if we are not logged in. So if we're not logged in, we don't need to see log out, we just need to see these two. So I want you to figure out how to do this, and you can use the get user composable to help you to get the current user. So again, pause it right here, have a go at this, and then when you need to see my solution, just press play again. So the way I'm going to do this is by first of all importing the get user composable right here, because that gives us the user object right here. Now, if this user is null, it means they're not logged in. If the user has a value, some kind of object, it means they are logged in. So we can use that to determine whether they're logged in or not and conditionally show those links. So we need to import it, and to do that, I'm going to duplicate this top one and change use logout to get user. Now we need to get that user down here, so let's do it at the top of the setup function, const, and we want to grab the user from this function. That's equal to get user like so. Okay, so now we can return it at the bottom, so it's available to us inside the template. Now then, we want to show this right here if the user is logged in. In other words, if this has a value. Now, if this has a value, it will evaluate to true. So what I can do is surround this with a v-if, and if we have a user, show this. So let's do a div first of all, and place this button inside the div, like so. Now then, I can attach a v-if to this and say, if we have a user, then show this button. So if they're logged in, if we have a user value, we see the logout button. Now, I only want to show these if we don't have a user. So what we could do is just place these inside a div that says v-else, because if we don't have a user, then v-else will fire instead and will show that content instead of this. Does that make sense? So let's do another div, and here I'll say v-else, and then place these links inside that. Let me put them in here, like so. So now, if there's a user and they're logged in, we show the logout button. Else, if they're not logged in, then we show these things right here. So if I save that now and preview, now we can see we only see these two things because I'm not logged in. If I try to log in, so mario@google.com and then test 1 2 3 4, log in, then now we see the logout button, and that's it, because I'm now logged in and we have that user value. If I click on this, then we see those other buttons again. So now this is all working. Alright then, so now we've got the authentication process down. We can sign up, log in, and also log out. I'd like to start to work on the meaty stuff to do with the playlists. So to begin with, I want to create a component which will act as a view for creating a playlist. And that's just going to be a form where we can enter in a playlist title, maybe a description, and upload an image as well to be a thumbnail or cover for that playlist. So let's start by creating a component for this inside our views, and it's going to go inside a new folder called playlists, because I'm going to organize all my playlist components inside here, and this is to create a new playlist, so we'll call it create playlist.view. Alright, so let's just boilerplate this, and inside here we'll do a paragraph tag to say create playlist. Alright, now we need to hook this up to our route file, so let's go to the route file over here, and down here we're going to create a new path, so /playlists/create. So that's going to be the route for our new component. Okay, so this needs a name, which is going to be create playlist, like so, and also a component. So component, and that is going to be create playlist, which we need to import. So I'm going to duplicate this, and instead of going into auth, it needs to be playlists. That's the folder we just created, and this time the file name is create playlist, like so. Okay. So this should all work. I'm going to go to /playlists/create, like so, and we can see this component which just says create playlist for now. So now let's flesh out this component. So in this component we need a form, and inside that form we're going to eventually have 3 different input fields. So the first one is going to be a text input, and that is for the title of the playlist. Then we're going to have a text area for the description of the playlist, and then finally we'll have a file upload field as well, and that's going to be for the cover image or the thumbnail of the playlist. So let's first of all create an H4 for the title, and we'll just say create new playlist, like so. Alright then, so let's capitalize new. Underneath that we're going to do our input field for the title. So this is of type text. It's also going to be required, and we need a placeholder for this as well, and that is going to say playlist title, and then also a v model so we can track what a user types in, and that's going to be equal to title. So we'll make this property down here later on. Okay, so that's the first one. Next we need a text area for the description. So for some reason Emmet's not working. I'll cut that and create it manually. like so. Have I spelled that right? No. Okay. Eventually got there. Right. Okay. So now we've created the text area. We need to also say that this is required, and the placeholder is going to be equal to playlist description. So playlist description ... And also we need to apply a V model to this. So V-model is equal to, and this is going to be called description, like so. Okay, so we have those two fields. Next up, we need our file upload. Now, to create a file upload field, we just say input, as we do normally, and then the type is file, and that generates a little button, and I'm going to show you that right now, like this. So we can choose a file on our computer. These are just thumbnails that I'm doing for my YouTube course at the minute, but we can choose a file now to upload right here. So we have the title, we have the description, and we have the file upload as well. Now I'm going to place a little label above that so we know what it's for. So let's do a label right here. We can delete for, and inside here we'll just say upload playlist cover image. Okay, now I'm also going to do a little comment right here to say upload playlist image, just so we know what this is right here. Okay, and finally we need a button to submit this. So button, and then we'll say create. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is create these data properties, title and description, down here inside the setup function. So first of all, the title, const title equals ref, enter to auto import that up here, and the initial value is an empty string. I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to call title description instead here. So now we have those two. We need to return them at the bottom so we can use them in the template, title and description. And also I want to attach a submit handler to the form. So we'll say at submit.prevent to prevent the default action, and we'll call this function handle submit, like so. So down here we need to make that function const handle submit and set it equal to a function. And inside this function for now, all I'm going to do is log to the console the title value and also the description value, like so. So that's all we're doing for now. We also need to return handle submit right here so that we can use it up here. All right, so finally, I also want to output some kind of error if there is one. Now, we don't have an error object yet, but I'm going to do the div just above the button right here, and that's going to have a class of error, and later on we can output the error there if there is one. All right then, so I think that's pretty much it. If I save it and preview, nothing much has changed. We see this label though and the create button at the bottom. What I'll do is just inspect so we can open up the console. I'm going to refresh as well, and yep, there's no errors. Let's give this a whirl, test, and then load of rubbish. We can choose a file right here. I'm just going to choose thumb3 and then create, and we can see these two things right here. So that's worked. Now what I'm going to do is also apply a few styles to this just to make it look a little better. So down here I'm going to paste those in like so. So the form itself, background of white, and in fact I don't think we really need that because it's already white. Next we target the input type of file to take away the border and the padding, and the label we style as well, font size a bit smaller, display block and margin top 30 pixels, and we give the button a bit of margin as well. So nothing drastic, but now it looks a little nicer. So now I have this form. In the next video I'm going to show you how to handle changes with this field right here. So when a user selects some kind of image, how to store that like we are doing with the title and description, how to track that and detect changes in that input field. Okay, so at the moment we have this file input right here, and we can click on this to choose a file, and we see that file name right there. But at the minute we don't store that file information anywhere like we do with the title and the description. These two we store in these two refs right here. But it's not as simple as adding a V model to a file input like this to track what a user chooses. That's not the way it works. instead we need to manually handle this value using an event listener. But what event listener do we add to file input to detect a file selected or a file change? Well, we can use the @change event, and this fires every time a user changes the value of the file. So initially, when they choose a file, it changes, and then again, if they choose a different file, it changes, so it reacts to that change. So let's go up and add an event listener to this input field. So @change, and set it equal to a function which I'm going to call handle change. Now we need to create that function down here, so let's do this. We'll say const handle change is equal to a function, and inside that function, remember, when we fire an event like this, we get access to an event object right here as an automatic argument. So we can access information about that event, and it's from this event object that we get information about the file that the user has selected. So the way we get that is by saying e.target, and that gets us the input field itself. That is the target element of the event. And then we want a property on that called files. So what I'm going to do is log this to the console, console.log these things right here. And in fact, what we'll do is store it in a constant. So we'll call this selected and set it equal to this. And then we'll just log to the console selected, like so. So if I save this and come to the console, we need to, first of all, open up the console. Then if I choose a file and select something, then we get an error. And why do we get an error? Let me have a look over here. Yes, it's because we've not returned that at the bottom. Handle change. Very easy to forget that. Make sure you always do that. So save it. I'm going to refresh, and then I'm going to choose one of these. And now we can see this thing logged to the console. So that is e.target files. So this thing right here, this is basically an array of files. It's actually a file list, but it's kind of like an array of files. Now in our case, there's only ever going to be one file selected. So we want the 0th position, which is this thing right here, which is an object, and that object represents the file we selected. So ideally we want to get the 0th file. And now if we save this, I'm going to refresh and then choose a different file. And now we can see we have this file object right here. And that contains information about the file. So the size, the type of file, the name of the file, etc. Now we can create a ref for this file and assign the selected value to that so we can track it this way. But first of all, we have to check that the selected variable right here has a value, because the change event also fires when we deselect a file. I'll show this. If I click on this again and press cancel, notice now no file chosen, and this selected variable right here becomes undefined. So I only want to update the ref if the file has a value. So we need to check for that first of all. So let's first create a file ref. I'm going to say const file is equal to ref, and it's going to be empty to begin with, or rather null. So that's the initial value. Now down here I want to check, does selected have a value? Because if it does, at that point I want to update this file. It means they've changed what they've selected right here, and I want to update this ref to be that information. So I'm going to do an if check right here, and I'm going to say if selected. And if that's the case, if selected has a value, I'm going to take the file.value and set it equal to selected, like so. Now otherwise, I'm going to take the value of the file and set it equal to null. So if they've changed it, for example, clicked and cancelled, then I'm going to reset this back to null. Does that make sense? So now we're only updating this with the selected image if they've chosen an image. And finally, I only want to allow the user to be able to upload image files. So for example, PNGs or JPEGs. So I need to check the type of file that they've selected. Now I can do that because we have this type property on the the file object. So on this selected right here, I can detect the file property. Now what I'm going to do is first of all make an array of allowed types. So a comment to say allowed file types, and then I'm going to create a constant called types and set it equal to an array of types. So these will be the types that I'm allowing. Now if we take a look at the format of this, we can see it's image and then / the file type. So I want to allow image / PNG, but also image / JPEG, like so. So these will be the allowed types, and if you had other allowed types, you'd place them inside this array as well. And what we can do now is check, does the selected type property over here match one of these things right here? If it does, then I'm going to allow this to be updated, this file thing. If it doesn't match one of those types, I don't want to update this because I don't want to allow the user to upload anything but these file types. So we'll add in a logical AND right here. So it must have a value and the type must include one of these things right here. So I'll say and types dot includes. So I'm using a method called includes on this array, and I can pass in a string here. So I could pass in something like hello, and this is saying, look, does this array include the string hello as one of its elements? Well, no, it doesn't, so this would be false. Instead of passing this in, I'm going to pass in selected.type. So the type property right here of the image or of the file that the user has selected. So if this is one of these, then this will be true, and so therefore it will be updated. If it's not, it will be false, and since this is false, this right here will be run instead. So now we're only allowing one of these types. Now, if it's the case that they select a different file type, I want to create some kind of error to show to the user to let them know they have to select an image, not some other file type. So I'm going to create another ref called file error. Const file error is equal to a ref which will be null to begin with. Oops, we need to do this correctly. So file error, like so, is equal to ref and null. Okay, so then down here, I want to create an error to say, look, you need to select an image file. So I'll say file error dot value and set that equal to please select, if I can spell it, select an image file, and then in brackets PNG or JPEG. Alright, so now if we try this, if we don't select an image file, we're going to generate this error. If we do select an image file, I also want to reset that error to null. So file error dot value and set it equal to null. So that's if they select a correct file type, an image. Now, if we choose something that's not an image and we generate this file, I'd like to output that inside the template underneath the input itself. So let's do a div with a class of error and output the file error right here. Now, if we go down here, we need to return the file error. So this works. And now I think that's everything, and we can check this. So now if I choose a file and it's an image, it's fine. We don't get an error. If I choose one that's not an image, I have a music file right here. It says, please select an image file, PNG or JPEG. So now this is working. I can go back to an image and it seems fine. So finally, what I'm going to do when we submit the form is also output the file value. So let me say file.value down here and see if this all works. I'll refresh and then I'll say test and then loaded junk. I'm going to choose a file and that is going to be road trip. And now if I create this, we can see test, this stuff, and the file. Now what happens if I try to use something like this? Well, I get this error message, but if I click create, it still outputs all of this, even though this is null, because we're not allowed an MP3 file, and we reset it back to null if they don't choose an image. It's still outputting it. It's still allowing us to submit the form. Now, I don't want to be able to submit the form if we don't have a value for the file. So let me come over here, and inside the handle submit, I'm going to say if file.value. So if it's null now, then this won't fire inside here. So let's cut that and paste it. And now it's only going to run this if we have a value for the file. So let me save this. I'm going to test this out again. I'll choose an MP3 and try to create, and it's not logging it to the console. If I cancel this, then it's still not logging it to the console. If I choose an image, then now it logs it to the console. So this is now all working. Okay, so we have this form now which captures the user's data and this image right here. And normally what we'd do is we'd save all of this data to the Firestore database. And that would be okay in the case of the title and the description. But what about the image? We don't store images in a Firestore database. That's not what the database is for. It's for more simple data like strings, arrays, numbers, timestamps, etc. So instead we need to use another Firebase service specifically designed for storing files like images. That would be, in our case, Firebase Storage. So you can think of Firebase Storage as a bit like a giant container where we can upload many different types of files to. So we could upload documents, images, movie files, MP3s, etc. Now, inside this giant container, we could create different folders for uploading different types of data. So we could create a thumbnails folder where we would upload thumbnail images. We could create a videos folder for uploading videos to. And we could also have subfolders. So for example, inside the videos folder, we could create a subfolder called tutorials and then upload tutorial videos to that folder. Now, the way we do this, the way we actually upload images using Firebase Storage is as follows. First of all, we create a file path, and this is basically just a path to where the file should be stored, and it's just a string. So for example, if our path was thumbnails, then it would mean when we come to upload this image to that path, put it in a thumbnails folder. If it was videos/tutorials, it means put it inside the videos folder, then inside a tutorials folder, and upload the image there. So that's the first step. We create a file path. The second step is to make a Firebase Storage reference. And to do that, we take the project storage, that's the Firebase SDK for Firebase Storage, and then we use a method on it called ref. And we pass into that method the file path. So in this case, thumbnails, for example. We pass that in there. And then we're storing this reference in a constant. So now we have a reference to where that file will go, but it's not uploaded yet. And to upload it, we need to take this reference we've created and use the put method on it. And we pass in the file that we want to upload to that reference. And then it uploads it to, in our case, the thumbnails folder. Now, once it's finished uploading, Firebase will then send back a public URL to access that file that we've just uploaded, and then we could use that from our Vue application. So in our case, for our project, our file path is going to look a bit like this. We're going to say, put it inside a covers folder first of all, then / and inside another folder, which will be the user ID. Now that's going to be different for every user. So every user now is going to have their own folder. And then finally, the file name. So each user will have their own folder, and that means that if multiple different users try to upload an image with the same file name, then it won't override each other because they're all inside their own user folder. Now, Firebase Storage also allows us to set up security rules, a bit like we saw with Firebase Firestore, and we might delve into those later as well. The first thing we need to do though is set up Firebase Storage inside our Firebase config file. So much like we imported the other services, Firestore and Auth, we also need to import Firebase /storage if we want to use storage in our project. We also need to initialize the service, much like we did with the other two down here. So let's create a new constant. You can call it what you want, but I'm going to stick with the same naming convention and call it project storage this time, and set it equal to firebase.storage. Okay, so now we've initialized that, we can go ahead and return it down here so we can use it inside other components later on. I'm going to do it before timestamp over here. So project storage like so. Alright, so now we're all set up to start using project storage in the next lesson. Alright then, so now we've initialized the Firebase storage service and we return project storage down here so we can use it elsewhere in the project. Let's try interacting with Firebase storage. Now to do this, we're going to be creating a brand new composable. So let's create a new file called use storage right here, .js. Okay then, so inside here, the first thing I want to do is import project storage. So we'll say import project storage, and that's going to be from, and it's ... come out of the current folder into the Firebase folder / config. Okay, so we've imported that. The next thing I'm going to do is create the use storage composable function. Alright then, so inside here I'm going to first of all create a few refs. So I'm going to create one for an error just in case there is an error. I'm going to enter on the ref to auto import it at the top, and this error is going to start as null. I'm also going to create one for URL, and this URL is going to be the public URL that Firebase sends back to us after we've uploaded the image. And this URL is how we're going to access the image from the front end, so we need that once we've uploaded it. So let's create a reference for that as well, and again, to begin with, it will be null. And then finally, we need one for the file path. And remember, this is the path to where we're saving the file in Firebase storage. So I'm going to set that equal to a ref, which will be null as well to begin with. Okay, so at the end, I need to return a few things, and I'm going to return the URL. I'm also going to return the file path. I'm also going to return the error. So we can get all of these things if we ever use this composable function in a component. Now down here at the very bottom, I'm going to export default use storage as well. Okay, cool. So now we just need to flesh out this function to actually upload an image. Now the first step is to create a function which will do this, and then we'll return this function as well at the bottom down here so that when we use this composable we can access that function to upload a specific image. So I'm going to call this function upload image like so. It's going to be an asynchronous function because it's going to take some time to do, and we're also, when we call this function, going to pass in the file that we want to upload. Now remember, inside our create playlist component, we get that file right here and we're storing it inside this ref. So we're going to pass in that file later on. Okay, so I'm going to now create a file path, which is where we want to store this inside Firebase storage. And to do that, we're going to be updating this ref. So I'll say file path.value to update the ref is equal to, and this is going to be a template string, so backticks. And remember, in template strings, we can output variables using $ and then curly braces. So this string is going to be covers, first of all, because I want to upload this into a covers folder, then /, and then next, remember, it's going to be the user ID, and that is the ID of the user currently logged in. So we need that. How do we get that? Well, remember, we have this get user composable right here, which gets us the current user, and I can use that to get the ID from that user. So at the very top over here, I'm going to say const user is equal to get user, and now we have this user object. Now that's going to be null if they're not logged in, and it's going to be an object with the ID on it if they are logged in. Now remember, they're not even going to be able to view this page if they're not logged in. So we don't have to worry too much about this being null because it shouldn't be. But now we can output the user ID inside this template string. So let's do that. $ curly braces to output a variable. Then inside we take the user object, which is this thing right here. And on that we can access the value, because this is a ref, remember. If we take a look at get user, this is a ref, so we need to use the .value property to get the value of the user, and then on that we have a UID property. So on the user object we have access to this unique ID property, and that is their user ID. So that is going to be the folder name right here that we place the file into. And the final part of this ref is going to be the file name. What do we want this file to be called? Well, again, this is going to be a variable, and we have a value, or we have a property on this file right here called the name. So I'm just going to say file.name, and we'll see that later. So that there is our file path. It's where we want it to be saved in Firebase storage. The next thing to do, remember, is to create a storage reference. So I'm going to create a const called storage ref and set that equal to project storage, like so, dot ref. That's the method we use to create a reference, and then we pass in the file path. Now it's the value on that, don't forget, because it's a ref. So now we have this storage reference right here. The only thing we need to do now is upload the file, and we do that using the put method. Now we're going to do this inside a try catch block. Just in case there's an error, we can catch the error. So I'm going to catch any error right here, and if there is an error, then I'm going to update this thing right here, this error ref. So I'll say console.log, first of all, the error.message, and then I'm going to come down here and say error.value is equal to error.message, like so. So now we're catching the error if there is one, but we need to try to do something first of all. And what we want to try to do is upload the file. Now I'm going to store the results of this task in a response object, because we'll need that later on. So const response is equal to await, and we can use that because this is an asynchronous function. So await storage ref, which is the storage ref we created right here. Then we use the put method and we upload the file. So we just pass in the file right here. So this is asynchronous. It's going to take some time to do, and it's going to pass us a response object. Now on that response object, we have access to a public URL. In Firebase, it's called a download URL, and we can get that. So I want to store that URL inside this ref right here. I'm going to say url.value is equal to res, which is the response of this action right here. And on there we have a reference to the file we uploaded, and on that we have get download URL. This is a method which will then get us the download public URL for that file we just uploaded. And now we have access to that right here. It's inside this ref. So if we use this composable in a component later on, we have access to it right here. Now finally, I just want to return this thing right at the bottom so that we can use this function inside a component when we use this composable later on. So that pretty much covers the basics of this composable function. Next, we'll carry this on and we'll try to use this composable to upload an image. Okay then, so now we've created this use storage composable and we have this function upload image to upload a file to Firebase storage. Let's try using this inside our create playlist component so that when a user chooses a file, then submits the form, it uploads that file to Firebase storage. And at the minute, you can see I've got the storage tab open and there's no files over here at the minute. So hopefully, fingers crossed, once we've done this, we will see an image here. Alright then, so first step is to import, let me just open up this tab, import the use storage composable into this create playlist component. So let's do that first. Import, and we want use storage, and that's from, and we want to say at, and then into the composables. So composables, and then / use storage. Remember, this references the very start of the application, or the root of the application, which is the source folder. Okay, so we've imported that. Now we can use it inside the setup function. So I'm going to say const, and I want to grab 3 things from this use storage hook. I'm going to grab the URL, the file path, and the upload image. So let us grab all of those. We need the file path, we need the URL, and we need the upload image function. And we set this equal to use storage like so. Okay, so now we can use these things down here when we submit the form. So now Remember, when we submit the form, we check that the file has a value first of all, and then we're just logging this to the console. But instead of this, let's now try to upload the file. So to do this, we're going to say await, and in order to use await, we need this to be asynchronous. So let's change that to async. And we're using await because this upload image function is asynchronous, remember? Async. And down here, now we can say await upload image. Remember, we pass in a file to this, and that's being stored in our ref. So we can pass in that file dot value because it is a ref. We need to use the value property, and that's all there is to it. So this now is going to try and upload this image. It passes the file into this function. It does all this stuff, and at the end of it, it's going to update the URL value, which we also get right here from this composable. So we're going to wait for this to happen. Then when it's done, I'm going to log out to the console. So console.log, image uploaded, and then we'll output the URL. So URL and then comma, and we want the URL dot value. So that is the value of the URL ref we get from use storage. So fingers crossed this is going to work, but let's just try refreshing. Seems we have an error, so let me see what that is. If I scroll up here, it says get user is not defined. So if we go back to use storage, we need to import that. I should have done that in the last lesson. Let me do that. Import, and it's going to be get user from, and we want to go into the same folder, so // and then the get user file. So now hopefully this will work. Yep, everything seems to work. However, this is only going to work if we're currently logged in, because we need that user ID. So let's make sure we log in first of all. Mario@google.com and then test1234, log in, and then I'm going to go to /playlists /create and try this out. You can see we're logged in because we only see the logout button at the top. Okay, so let's try creating a playlist. It doesn't matter what these values are right here, but we'll choose an image. I'm going to choose the beach one. We can see that file right here. And this is the name property, by the way, which we use inside the composable when we said file.name, remember? Okay, so let's create this, and hopefully it will upload this now to Firebase. So we don't really see anything on screen, but over here we see image uploaded, and the URL is a promise, which is pending. And this is the URL right here, which we'll see later on. But if we go to Firebase storage and refresh, hopefully now we can see we have that covers folder. It created that because it's in the file path. And if we go into that, we should be able to see the user folder. So that's my user ID. And if we go to authentication, we can verify that. So it starts in ZJ, ends in what looks like L1. So this one here, ZJL1. So that's the same ID. So each user will have their own folder. And inside that, we have hopefully a beach.png file. And we can open this up in a new tab just to see it. So that has successfully uploaded. And we have also the URL back, which we can use later on to show that picture on the website. And we are also going to store this URL inside the Firestore database when we create documents for playlists. So each playlist will have its own documents with its title, its description, its list of songs, and also its image URL, which will be this thing right here. So we're going to start that process next. Okay, so we've seen how we can upload an image now to Firebase storage, and that image is right here inside the covers folder, inside the user ID folder, and we can see that image right here. But also, when we create a new playlist, we also want to store the details of that playlist in our Firestore database. So for instance, we want to save the title, the description. We also want to save the URL to the image so that when we load that playlist in the browser later, we can use that URL to show that image on the screen. And we also want to store other properties like which user created it, so their UID, maybe their username as well, and maybe a list of songs for that playlist, etc., as well as a timestamp. So let's create that document for each playlist now. So the first thing I want to do inside create playlist is to import a few things that we need. And remember, this is the component for this form right here. So I'm going to import a few things. I'm just going to paste them in. And we're importing use collection. That's this composable because we use this to add a new document using this function add doc to a collection. And remember, we pass that collection in when we use the composable. So we're importing that first of all because we want to use the playlist collection, which is not yet created, but that doesn't matter, to add a new playlist. And then we're importing get user so that we can get the current ID of the user and also their username, because both of those things are going to be stored in the playlist document as well. And then finally, we import timestamp from the Firebase config file because we'll use that to add a created app property on each playlist as well, so that later we can order these by date and time. Okay, so we want to add a new playlist document inside the handle submit function over here. So we're going to do this after we've uploaded the image, because at that point we have access to the URL, and that URL is going to be saved inside the document for the playlist. So let me get rid of this console log to begin with. And instead what I'm going to do is use this composable, use collection right here. So I'll say const, and I want to grab the error if there is one, and also the add doc function. And I'm going to set that equal to use collection, and this collection is going to be playlists. Now remember, if we try to add a document to a collection which doesn't yet exist, it doesn't matter. Firebase will look at that and create the collection for us. So we want to use this function now. So I'll copy that down here. And again, it's asynchronous. So I'm going to await this, add doc, and then we pass in an object which represents the document we want to add to this collection. So like I said, this is going to have numerous different properties, quite a lot in fact. The first one is going to be the title. We can get that from this ref right here. So title is title.value. The next one is the description. And again, we're storing that in a ref. So description.value. So that was this thing right here. So that is what a user enters into this form, these two fields. Now, after that, I also want to store the user ID, so we can kind of attribute this playlist to a specific user so that later I can display only playlists that I've created when I'm logged in. And if another user was logged in, they would see only their playlists. So this is the property we're going to use to identify which user created this playlist. So user ID, and that is going to come from this thing right here, get user. So we need to use that down here. I'm going to say const user is equal to get user like so, and then I can grab it down here. It's a ref, so I have to use user.value, then the UID property, which is their unique identifier. All right, so after that, I'd also like to store their username, because when we display the playlist on the homepage, I'd like to say which user created it underneath that playlist title. It would be a bit daft to show their unique ID because that's not very descriptive. Instead, I'm going to show their username. So we'll say user name, and we'll say user.value to access the value of the user object again, and then it's their display name property. Okay, so we also want a cover URL, so that's the URL to the image which we just uploaded right here. And remember, we have access to that on this ref URL. So we'll just say URL.value. After that, I'm going to use the file path because I need to store this so that if in the future we want to delete the image, we have the file path to that image. It's no good just having the URL because that's the public URL. We don't use that to delete the image from Firebase storage. We use the file path. So I need to store this so that later on, if the user then decides they want to delete their playlist, they can do, and it uses this file path. So again, we have access to that. That's why we returned it inside the use storage hook. Let me just return to that to show you what it looks like. Use storage, and it's the file path right here. It's a ref, and it looks something like this. So in covers, then the user ID, then the file name. So we have access to that now on each playlist document, so that if we want to delete it, we can use that file path. So that's filepath.value because it is a ref after all, we have to use value. All right, so after that, I'm going to create a songs property, and that's going to be an array. And to begin with, it will be empty because they've just created the playlist. There's no songs in it to begin with, but later when they add songs, this is the property we're going to be updating. And then finally, I'm going to create a created app property, which is going to be a timestamp, which we imported right here. So we can just use that function to create a timestamp like so. And that's all there is to it. We're now adding this new document to the playlist collection right here because we pass playlists in as an argument. So it adds that new document. Now then, I want to check, is there an error at the end of all this? Because we get the error from use collection. Now, if there's an error trying to add this document, then I don't really want to allow the user to proceed. Instead, I'm going to probably show that error on the screen. If there's not an error, what I'm going to do is say in the console something like playlist added, just for now. So let me check for this error. I'll say if there's not an error.value, because it's a ref, then we'll log something to the console. So console.log, and we'll just say playlist added. And this is only logging if there's no error. Okay? So then, let me give this a whirl. I'm going to save that for now and come over here. I'm just going to add in a load of junk and then choose a file. We'll say travel, and then I'm going to create this. So hopefully, in a second, after all this is done, we can see now, okay, so document reference.set called with an invalid data, custom promise, blah, 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 blah. All right, so let's check this out to see if there's any error. And I think what's happening is because when we in use storage get the download URL, this is actually an asynchronous task. So it takes some time to do. And what we're doing is storing a promise inside the URL right here. We have to await this. So we have to wait for this to get the download URL. Otherwise, we're just storing a promise in here. So if we wait for it, then we're actually getting the value. And now this should work. So let me try this again. I'm going to refresh over here and I'm going to try adding in a new title and then a new playlist description. Choose a file. We'll choose night and then create it. And now fingers crossed, this should work over here. Yep, playlist added. Awesome. So let's check this out over here. I'm going to refresh and we might see a couple more images because we've just uploaded 2 more. So night is the one we just uploaded. And if we go to the Firestore, we should see now the document for that new playlist. And we can see all of these properties are populated. So the cover URL, that's the public URL to the image we just uploaded, the night one. This is when it was created, the description, file path, the songs, the title, user ID, and the user name. So all of that is now stored in the database as well. So we've done both of those things, uploaded the image, and we've created a document which has a reference to that image as well, so it knows which image is associated with the playlist. Now there's one more thing I want to do right here, because when we click on create, it does take a second or two to make that request and get a response and log this to the console. I'd like this to show a loading message instead while we're making that request, and so you can't click on the button again, much like we did when we signed up before or logged in. So let's do that. Remember, to do that, we used an is pending state, but there's a problem here because we're doing 2 things. So we need to wait for both of those 2 things to essentially finish. So we can't just use is pending from where we add a document, which is inside use collection right here. We can't do that because we start the process inside create playlist before we even try to add a document. So is pending needs to start at this point here. Start here. Okay? And then it needs to end right here. So is pending needs to go to true here, and is pending needs to go to false here. So what we could do, instead of just using an is pending from here and create one and one from here and use that one together, we could just create a local one inside this component, which is what I'm going to do. It's the easiest thing to do in this scenario. So I'm going to say const is pending is equal to a ref, and to begin with it's going to be false. And then right here, when we handle the submit, if the file has a value, at this point I want to set is pending to true because we're starting to do something, right? So let's say is pending dot value is equal to true, and then at the end over here, that's where we set it back to false. So is pending dot value is equal to false at this point. So now we can use this information inside our template if we return it down here. So is pending, if I can spell it. Yep. All right. And what I'd like to do is show one button if is pending is false. That's the create button. And then another one if is pending is true, which says something like saving. So let's do a viv on this first. So viv is equal to not is pending. So only if is pending is false, because then the whole statement is true. If it's false, it means we're not trying to do something. So I'm going to duplicate this and change this to just is pending. And then if is pending is true, it means we're trying to load something. And in that case, we'll say saving ... And we'll also make this disabled. Now, instead of this, we could just do a v-else, which in fact is what I'm going to do. So if something is not pending, then we see create. Otherwise, we see